I know this much about the Jaguars' schedule. When the Jaguars play the Packers are going to pack the house. Pun completely intended. Welcome everybody to JG9 News, where we talk all things NFL all the time. I'm Jaguar9, representing the 904 from the 602, and today we are talking about the Jacksonville Jaguars and at least a portion of their schedule. I've got my thoughts on the Jags schedule that I'm going to break down later this week, so be sure to hit that like button and hit that notification bell and subscribe so you don't miss a moment of the action, because we've got videos, a ton of videos on the NFL schedule and the news that came out. But I do want to talk about the Jaguars-Packers game that is taking place in Week 8 on October 27th. The NFL kind of screwed the Jaguars over with a portion of their schedule because the first 7 games of the year, just 2 of them are going to be in Jacksonville. You've got the Week 2 game against Cleveland, and you got the Week 5 game against Indianapolis, and every other game is either in London or is on the road. So Jags fans won't be able to see their team in Jacksonville a whole lot to start the year off, but in Week 8, they have maybe their biggest home game of the season in terms of the marquee opponent, and it is the Green Bay Packers Week 8. Now, we all know that this game is going to be massive. For the Packers, it's their first time playing the Jaguars in Jacksonville since 2016, although oddly enough, they did actually play in Jacksonville against the New Orleans Saints a few years ago. That game moved due to a hurricane in New Orleans, so they moved that game to Jacksonville. But this will be, for all intents and purposes, the first time that we know that the Packers are coming to Jacksonville in 8 years. Packers, obviously a very, very good team. Maybe the favorites to win the NFC North. They are expected to make the playoffs. Big fan base. Franchise quarterback potentially in Jordan Love. Made the division round last year. That game is going to be huge. But what's interesting about that game, and I don't know if it was planned like this, I don't know if the Jaguars are thinking about it, but that game could be potentially the largest crowd in Jaguars history, because I could see a scenario where they expand the stadium for the Packers game, because there's an interesting little quirk with the schedule in terms of that game. For those who don't know, how EverBank Stadium works is that it's a fixed capacity of around 65,000 seats. However, they do have temporary bleachers that go up every now and then where the pools are and behind the Bud Light Party Zone. It used to be the Bud Zone. It will forever be the Bud Zone in my heart. But they have temporary bleachers you can put up in the north end zone and in the south end zone. They only do it one time a year, though. They don't do it for any Jaguars games. They do it, though, for the Florida-Georgia game. That's the moneymaker for the city. That's the moneymaker for the stadium. That's the main reason why they're doing these renovations, to try and keep the Florida-Georgia game in Jacksonville. And that game is taking place on November 3rd, as in 6 days after the Jaguars-Packers game. What does that mean? The infrastructure in terms of the bleachers will already be there and will already be in place. The bleachers start going up about 2 weeks in advance. And I know this from experience. I have been to a ton of Jags games that take place the week before either Florida, Georgia, or when they used to do bleachers for the Gator Bowl. The Monday Night Football game against the Baltimore Ravens in 2011, there were temporary bleachers in the end zones. No one sat there, but they were there. The structure was in place. And then for the game on New Year's Day in 2012 against the Indianapolis Colts, the Gator Bowl was the very next day Florida played in that game. They had temporary bleachers for that, and the infrastructure was in place. I've seen that stadium with the temporary bleachers there and everything in place, even if the game doesn't take place for a few days after that. And you're seeing a photo right now of what the stadium looks like with the temporary bleachers. Again, you notice the pools are not being used. That deck, it used to be the Clevelander deck back in 2014. That deck is no longer being used because of the bleachers there. They temporarily take that out to put in those bleachers and increase the capacity so that Florida, Georgia can get about 80,000 people in the stands, because that always sells out. And obviously the Jaguars have never sold the bleachers before because there's no need for them. They don't fill the stadium as it is, and it's not a knock on Jacksonville or anything like that, but they're reducing the capacity to 62,000 with the newly renovated stadium, and it's tough to sell out 80,000 seats. Very few teams in the NFL can sell out 80,000, so there's no need to put up the bleachers. And then you figure the cost for added concession workers, you figure the cost it's going to take to put them up, and how many tickets you're going to sell. It just wouldn't be worth it. You would lose money, and the permits and hiring people to put it up, it wouldn't make a lot of sense. And that's part of why they didn't do it for the playoffs. Not because they wouldn't sell it out, but because the infrastructure wouldn't be able to go up in time. You have to hire people. You have to get the permits. But for the Packers game, you don't need to do that. The bleachers are already going to be in place. The bleachers are already going to be there. Everything is going to be set up. If you want to go to that Jaguars-Packers game in Week 8 and you want to go into the pool, you're not going to be able to go in the pool. So I'm just warning Packers fans, if you want to go and see the pool, you're not going to be able to see it. It's going to be covered up by the bleachers for Florida, Georgia. So it raises the question, why not just sell the bleachers for that game? Again, I completely get why they don't sell them for the other games, because when you sell them for the other games that take place during that week of Florida, Georgia, the quality opponent might not be as good, and you're not going to sell out 80,000 seats. The Packers, though, you absolutely can, and you probably will, because the Packers game draws crazy good crowds, and I know this from experience. Look at 2016. In 2016, the Jaguars opened the season against the Packers, and that game sold out. It didn't just sell out. They added standing room only tickets for that game. And they didn't just do that. The ticket prices for that game were absolutely insane. The Jaguars sold that game out with ease, and on the secondary market, tickets were 4 times the value. I know people online that have season tickets to the Jaguars that decided, you know what? I'm going to sell my ticket for that game, and I'm going to essentially go to every other Jaguars game that season at home for free. Now, granted, it was a terrible season for the Jaguars. They finished 3-13. It was one of the worst seasons of my life. But people did that because the Packers draw great crowds, and it's their first time in Jacksonville, where we know for a fact they're coming to Jacksonville. They don't have to make last-minute plans there. What happened against the Saints in 8 years. So you're going to get an audience. And here's a photo I actually took. I was at that game against the Packers in 2016. Here's a photo I took during the national anthem. You can see it's completely packed. There is not a single empty seat really in the stands, barring a few exceptions, and those would get filled later on because the national anthem takes place about 15 minutes before the game starts. So that was a very packed crowd, very fun atmosphere. Packers won that game. There were a lot of missed calls when against Jacksonville. 4th and 2, the Allen Hurns screen pass was one of the dumbest decisions I've seen a Jaguars coach make. That'll be a fun dumb decision at some point. By fun, I mean absolutely painful. And Aaron Rodgers, at the end of the first half of that game, had one of the greatest throws I've ever seen in my life as he was getting pulled down, just threw an absolute dime 40 yards downfield. It was incredible to watch, even though it went against the Jaguars. But just a quick photo of what it looked like 8 years ago when the two teams met, and the Jaguars were terrible back then. Obviously, a lot has changed since then. And we know that the NFL allows you to change your capacity for certain games in a season. It's not a fixed number. Again, they added standing room only tickets in 2016. In 2012, the Jaguars had all the tarps on for certain games, but there were select games where they took some tarps off. The Bears game, they took some tarps off. The Jets game, they took some tarps off. The Patriots game, they drew over 70,000 people at a time when the stadium held 67,000. And that was because they took some tarps off. The attendance fluctuated. You can change your capacity in the middle of the season, at least from everything I can find, at least from everything I know with the Jaguars and experience. So if the bleachers are going to be there, we know Jags-Packers is going to sell out. Is there a reason not to sell the bleacher seats that week? Again, it's not like you have to build the bleachers and put them up and weigh the pros and cons of that and spend a lot of money and do some cost analysis and see what's going to happen there and whether it's worth it or not. Everything's already in place. Everything is already going to be in place. If this game was taking place October 20th or November 27th or any date like that, believe me, we're not having this conversation. We're not having this conversation. They would stick to the capacity they have. But because there are going to be an extra 10,000, 15,000 seats in the stands as it is, you might as well use them, especially because it's the Packers game and they're going to get people. No matter how many tickets you put on sale for that game, whether it's 65,000, whether it's 81,000, it's going to sell out. Packers Jaguars will sell out. Now, obviously, it's going to be a lot of Packers fans in the stands, which is not a surprise at all. But it will sell out. If the Jaguars want to increase local revenue, if the Jags want to make money that way, this is a way to do it. This is absolutely a way to do it. And I could definitely see the Jaguars and Shad Khan and the owner and a lot of people in the business side, Mark Lamping being one of them, thinking to themselves, you know what? Jaguars-Packers, probably going to be our highest attended game of the season, probably going to be our most expensive ticket of the season. Why not add some extra seats if they're going to be there anyways for Florida, Georgia in a few days after the game? If the same's already in that configuration, why not? And I don't know if that was the plan all along, if the Jaguars requested that, and that's going to happen as a result, or if this is just a complete coincidence and it just happened to be this way, and now the Jags are thinking, oh, wait a sec, we might be able to make some money here. But interesting quirk on the schedule that I felt the need to talk about, because with this infrastructure already there and the Packers being the opponent, the one team that I'm 100% confident the Jaguars will sell out every single seat and would sell out a ton more seats if it was available, because again, 2016, they were absolutely terrible, and those tickets still went for 4 times the value, and there was not an empty seat in the house. I have a feeling this could potentially happen. But what are your thoughts on the possibility of the Jaguars-Packers game taking place at an expanded EverBank Stadium with roughly 80,000 fans in attendance? What are your thoughts on all that? Do you think it's going to happen? Do you think it would go down? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. And who do you think wins that game, Jaguars-Packers? I know it's a long ways away, week 8, a lot can happen. But who do you think wins? Let me know everything down below. And that's going to do it for this episode of JJ9 News. Be sure you like and subscribe. Helps the channel out a lot. And be sure to check out my main channel, Jaguar9, where we talk all things NFL history all the time. Until next time, this is Jaguar9 signing off. And as always, go Jags.